I have been a game developer for the past 4 years and had experience working at Voodoo, one of the biggest game development companies, with which I have tested a total of 3 successful prototypes. Based in my professional experience, I will be presenting 10 tips and tricks to become a better game developer that are gonna be more tailored for beginners but will be useful for intermediates and advanced developers as well. Let's start. 1. Stick to small games. Small games allows you to gain a lot of knowledge in a short period of time, because as you're gonna be experimenting the creation of different mechanics, different features, completely different from the previous project that you have created, that is gonna actually allow you to learn much more in less time, as the project is much smaller. So basically, if you are able to create tons of small games, you're gonna be learning tons of different mechanics, and therefore for every single mechanic that you're learning, you're gonna be actually gaining a lot of interesting knowledge. Whereas on the other hand, if you just focus on creating super big projects, you won't actually have the chance of experimenting with different core gameplays, because you will just have, let's say, one core gameplay, and from there you will just be trying to expand as much as you can that core gameplay, but just by adding secondary mechanics, and you're gonna actually be learning nothing new. 2. Less tutorials. Tutorials are amazing, but tutorials are just, first of all, theory, okay? And then in most cases we are just replicating. When you watch a tutorial, you're just replicating what you see on your end, and that isn't actually something like learning or gaining some kind of knowledge if you're just copying and pasting code, copying and pasting different kinds of components. So you really have to consider the fact that even though tutorials are an amazing tool, you have to make the most of them in the correct way. And basically this means creating projects with the knowledge that you gained in tutorials, that you don't watch actually complete courses about how to create a complete game, for example, and just replicate it on your end, because sometimes this isn't actually gonna have a huge impact on your learning, because you're just gonna be copying what the instructor is doing. So on the other hand, try to include some new features on your own or with other tutorial, but that you're looking besides the tutorial that you're watching, or just yourself with the documentation, try to add some other new mechanics. 3. More practice. This is super connected to the previous point about less tutorials. If you watch less tutorials, you're gonna have more time in order to practice a little bit more. And actually here in programming, practice is even more important. Because for example, if you want to play the guitar, you may know all the theory about the music, all the different notes, etc. But then when it comes the time to actually practice to play the guitar, you can't even play one single note. So with programming, it's the exact same thing. Even though if you have watched tons of tutorials, even though you have read the documentation a lot, if you don't practice, you aren't actually gonna be able to become a better game developer. So what you have to focus the most is on practicing the most that you can. Basically, try to balance the amount of tutorials that you watch with the amount of projects that you create. And I would tell you that 75% of your time you should be practicing, basically creating projects on your own, and the rest 25% of your time you should be watching tutorials, trying to research some information, etc. But the time that you spend should be much more about practicing than in theory or tutorials. 4. Don't waste time in art. I understand that when we are starting in game development, sometimes we do want to have our own art in our game, because we want to have our own characters, our own models, etc. But actually art is much more complicated than it may seem at the beginning. So we may spend a lot of time in that, but the reality is in that in most games, either A, they buy some pre-made assets, B, they hire somebody, or C, they directly have some kind of assets that they download it for free on the internet, okay? So as you can see, most cases they don't create their own assets, at least the game developer. Maybe they do have a design team, a modeling team that does that job, but not the game developer creates their own assets usually, because it's super time consuming. So basically, do not waste your time in creating your own art, but on the other hand, start downloading some free models, free assets on the internet. There are a bunch of them. Literally look for any kinds of asset that you want, either 2D or 3D, and I'm sure that you will find it somewhere. And even you don't have to pay, because of free assets, there are lots of free assets. Of course, there are some of them that, because they are so specific, maybe you don't find them. But well, you can still take a look at some quite interesting assets without neither spending money nor wasting your time on that. And at the same time, this will allow you to practice even more, as mentioned on the previous point. Focus on core gameplay. The core of the game is what actually is gonna give us new knowledge, as there are mechanics that are similar in different games. For example, in most games, you will have some kind of player movement. So basically that isn't a core mechanic of the game. So what we really have to focus on when creating a game, when practicing, is to create different kinds of core gameplays. So for example, this can really have a difference if we change the game genre that we are creating. If we are creating an open world game, the core gameplay is gonna be different, of course. That on the other hand, if we create a 2D casual game, the core gameplay is gonna be super different. So that's what I meant when telling you focus on the core gameplay, focus on learning different core gameplays. So basically, don't focus a lot in secondary mechanics, in creating secondary mechanics, but on the other hand, you should focus on building a strong core gameplay, okay? With no bugs, that it has interesting features, interesting mechanics, but do not really focus a lot in secondary mechanics. For example, if you are creating a game, do not really focus on creating a shop with thousands of skins, with thousands of assets to customize. If you really want to add a shop and you haven't added a shop, okay, just add one time a shop in one game, and you don't have to add a shop in every single game that you create because you already know how to include a shop. And if you really want to include a shop in your game, do not include 20, 30 items there. You just want to have the core gameplay there, the core mechanic there, basically the shop, working with 1, 2, 3 items, 4 items most, and with that you're gonna be more than enough in order to say, okay, I have learned how to create a shop. 6. Overthinking about the game engine. Here in this tip, it is quite a global tip here, because as game developers and we want to look for game engines, well, we realize that there are tons of options that we can choose with advantages, disadvantages, etc. So it's quite overwhelming, the fact that we don't really know which engine to use because there's a lot of information on the internet. However, trust me that when we are starting out and when we just want to start creating our games, the game engine that we're going to be using doesn't really matter. Nowadays, mostly all engines, all softwares that we can use in order to create a game are quite the same in terms of you're gonna have a playable game at the end of the day. You're gonna have to use some kind of programming language. You will have some kind of hierarchy system. So what may change is the path that you have to follow in order to come to the result, but the result is gonna be still a playable game. So the path that you have to go through doesn't really matter, I would tell you, because the final product, you will still have it, okay? So basically remember that nowadays, a lot of engines provide amazing tools to create literally any kind of game, so really stop hesitating about which engine to use. Choose whichever you think is gonna be the best for you based on the reviews that you have read, based on your budget, because there are engines that you're gonna have to pay in order to use, or when you start publishing you will have to pay some money. And also in the computer that you have, because if you do not have a super expensive PC, you aren't gonna be able to create 3D 4K games, for example. So there are a lot of things that you have to consider. So my recommendation here for game engines is to start simple with an engine that is simple. The simplest engine out there is Godot, so that's the main one that I would recommend because it's the simplest, and from there you can go to any other engine. If you have a little bit more powerful PC, you can go for Unity, for example. It is a little bit more complicated because of the C# programming language that it uses. But the main point here is that you don't have to overthink about the game engine that you have to use, because most of them right now work quite well, and the result that you will get is mostly similar in all engines. And from there, when you do have a comprehensive knowledge about game development, logic, game design, etc., you can migrate to any other engine that you may like. 7. Ideate before getting to code. It is better to think twice and have to start from scratch because the game idea isn't as interesting as you thought. Basically, the ideation process doesn't have to be super long. It can be literally a sheet of paper where you write the core gameplay and the secondary mechanics of your game. Maybe you draw in hand just some assets that you would like to find online. And from there, it's gonna be okay. The key point here is that you do have an idea in your mind at least before getting to code, because sometimes you are there coding and you don't know where to start, where to go after creating some kind of mechanics, because you don't really have a plan. And it's like sailing without having a map. You know, you do have to have a map. You do have to have some kind of route that you have to follow, because if not, it's gonna be literally impossible. It is like trying to play some kind of match in any sport, and for example, you didn't plan your strategy, how to attack the opponent, how to defend with the opponent. You're gonna be there, and you aren't going to know what to do next. So that's why ideation is super important. And to ideate your project is as simple as a sheet of paper. Write the main mechanics, the secondary mechanics, some assets, and that would be all. And finally, you can also, it's gonna be a little complicated, but write the step-by-step that you're gonna follow in order to code the game. Basically, I will start with the player movement, then I will add player collisions, then I will add the obstacles, then I will create the obstacle spawner, etc. 8. Take inspiration from everywhere. Right now we do have an amazing catalog of games in every store page, so experiment with different genres that you can find out there on any store page, and also take inspiration from the daily life. There are sometimes circumstances, subjects that we see on the reality that sometimes can be used in order to create our games. Even there are some story games that directly come from a dream that the developer had. So that's how crazy daily life can have an impact on the inspiration for a game. So really consider this. 9. Write clean code. Writing clean code means that you can write code that is understandable, that you can easily modify, and where you can also spot errors easily and fix them. And basically this can give you huge advantages when you write clean code. First of all, you can expand it super easily. If you want to add new mechanics, new features, you can do it because you can easily understand what is happening there. And also, whenever you come to some kind of error, you can super easily spot it and fix it right away, because again, the code is clear, direct, etc. So if you are a beginner, I understand that sometimes writing clean code is a little bit difficult. So what you can do, and what I suggest you, is that first of all, you write the code. It doesn't matter if it is clean or not. And once the code is working, you first of all save that code in order to avoid losing it. And then you try to refactor it, okay? Basically, to refactor a code means to write the exact same code, the same functionality, but with a different code that is clean. 10. Use a version control system. I am sure you have already heard of some kind of version control systems such as Git and GitHub. But basically, these are kind of softwares that will allow you to save your different progress through commits in the cloud. That this will allow you to save your progress in your projects. So if your computer dies, for example, you're gonna be able to recover all your projects, all your files, because they are in the cloud, okay? And you usually have like unlimited storage in this kind of softwares, so that is amazing. And also you are able to download your files and projects from different computers, okay? So make sure that you are using some kind of version control system. You can find tons of tutorials on different softwares about how to use these version control systems. So these were the 10 tips that I had to show you in this video, that this will hopefully allow you to become a better beginner, intermediate, or advanced game developer. If they were helpful, please let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.